Hey y'all, so it's been one of those weeks. I really haven't got nothing done, and it's Friday evening. It's the first time I've been out in the shop this week. I had a abscess tooth earlier that I ended up having to get pulled about Tuesday. It's kind of put me out for a couple of days dealing with a pain in my jaw. But it's easing up, so now I'm going to try to get back to work. Plus I've had some issues with my truck. I've had to work on it. You know, it's just one of those weeks where nothing goes right. But what I'm working on tonight, I'm not doing any forging, but I've got a customer of mine that has bought a couple knives, brought me these two that he had that he wants a leather sheath made for. He wants to do away with the nylon plastic junk and have a nice leather one made. So that's what we're going to work on. Get everything laid out and we'll get started. So what I've got here, try not to block the light too much, is a double shoulder. This is the first time I've bought a piece of leather this big. So we're going to roll it out and see how much we got. And that's a lot. Now, the way I do leather, it's probably not the right way, but it works for me. As far as the knife sheath goes, I don't use any templates. I don't use any templates because just about every piece I make is a custom piece. I don't make any knives that's the same normally, so I just make every sheath to fit the knife that I'm working on. So I'm going to grab me a ruler. Not a ruler, but something I can use for a straight edge here to give me a reference. I want this knife to sit down in the sheath a little bit. When I lay them out, try to get it to where you can see it here. All I'm going to do is follow the blade edge, and I like to stay about a ½ inch out away from it. It's going to be pretty straight to there, and as we get up here, it's going to be fatter around the handle, so I got to taper it out just a little bit. And I'll make it a little bit bigger because I will trim it later. Now, all I'm going to do right here is turn it straight up and roll it over. And I'm trying not to move it either way to the side. So my halfway point was about right there. And I'm just going to follow that edge the same way. And this will get us pretty close. And sometimes what I'll do is trace the one side, and I'll get it turned straight up in the middle right there. Make me a mark in the center on both ends. Then I'll go ahead and cut this side out, fold it over, and trace it to cut my other side. Well, I think we look pretty close. I need to round that out just a little bit more. Put my cutting mat up under here so I don't mess up this nice fancy table. Take our knife here. It's okay if it's not perfect. I'd rather be outside the line than inside of it, because I can trim that off later. To get me another light in this corner. It's kind of dark. Now while I'm right here, and I've already got my curve and all marked, I'm going to go ahead, I think I'm going to do it from this side so I don't waste much. I'm going to draw out another line, and I'm going to leave this one about a 1/2 inch wide or so, maybe just a little wider. But this piece will go, when I fold this over, this piece will go in between. So when I stitch it, this piece protects your stitching from getting cut on the inside. I've got those two pieces cut. And the only other piece I'll need will be for the belt loop. So I've got our main bodies cut out and our middle piece. And I'm just going to cut one long strip off of this. And I measured it out to 1.5 inches wide. And this strip will be my belt loop for both sheaths. This is 9-ounce leather. The knife I'm using to cut it is one that I made for myself. Just round it on this side and then straight flat on this side so I can get a nice sharp corner where I need it. Cut that off, and there's our strip. I'll get this cleaned up and I'll show you what I do next. So now I'm going to take my spray bottle here, it's just water, and I'm going to case the leather. Get over here so I don't get the table wet. All I'm doing is I'm going to wet it to soften it up. So I'm going to form it around the knife. I'm not wet forming, but I'm forming it around it just to get my basic shape. But I'm going to let that soak in just a little bit. And as it soaks through, it softens the leather. Now just for this, I don't want it soaking wet. If if I was wet forming it, I would soak the whole piece. I'm gonna lay it in here, try to get my center points. Just fold it over. If you try to do this dry, like my voice, you'll end up with cracking down the spine of it. Just want to try to work that down so you get a nice crease in it. Both of these, I don't know if I've said yet, they're just going to be plain sheaths. They're not going to be any tooling on it, no patterns or nothing. So that's pretty close. And you see that overlap. I was off a little bit on my freehand drawing, but now that it's folded, I can trace that and just trim it off. And it's not much. That's why I like the rounded side on this knife. I can follow the curves. And at this point, it don't have to be perfect, because the way I do it, I'll go back and trim that up to make sure that they match really good. Trying to see how far my blade's in, so I know about where to lay my middle piece here. So like I said, once you put this together, this piece here just protects your stitching, so when you stick the knife down in it, you don't cut your stitches and then it falls apart. So I'm going to do a little bit of trimming here to get it closer, and then I will come back for the next steps. So now that we've got our pieces trimmed pretty close, I've got some E6000 glue here. I use this because it works really good and it's nice and flexible. And I've got glue on my lid and it's stuck. But our piece here, I'm just going to give it a good coat. This side I'm going to go ahead and glue in place. And I'm gluing the suede side of the leather. So when I fold it to do my stitching holes, I'm just going to kind of tack glue it in place, and then I will take it back apart. But this side I want to go ahead and glue permanent. And I'm no expert at this. Like I said, this is just the way I do it. I got into the leather because as a knife maker, I didn't really want to pay anybody else to make them for me. And it's kind of expensive to get somebody to make them for you. At least the first ones I had made were. But I understand why. It takes a good bit of time to do this. And it takes a good bit of tools, especially if you're doing any tooling as far as basket weave or anything like that. And for no more than what they are, they add up fast. I know some of those stamps are $30, $40, $50 a piece. You buy a few of them and that adds up pretty quick. So I just use clothespins. It's cheap, it's simple, just to hold that in place, to let it dry. Make sure I've got them covered good. And the way I do this, as long as I have the inside where the knife is going to be good, I'm not so much worried about the outside right now, because once I get this side glued and dried, like I said, I'm going to fold this over, and normally I just use super glue and I'll just put a little dab in different places down and just tack it in place. Then I will either trim it with my knife, or sometimes I will take it to my belt grinder and use a coarse belt and just lightly go around it and make sure I've got all my edges lined up and everything's nice and smooth. But I'm going to leave that sit for a few minutes and I will be right back. So now we should be dry enough to do what we need to do, so we'll go ahead and pull these off. Knife, trim this end right here. And like I said, for this part, normally I just use super glue. I'm not putting much, just a little dab. And space them out because I do want it to stay tight to itself. But I don't want this permanent because I'm going to pop it back apart. Make sure I get my corners lined up. I could go ahead and glue it solid, but I don't, because when I go to dye it, I'll pop it back apart so I can dye the inside. Because to me, it's just one of those things that just bothers me. I can't stand a sheath that's dyed pretty on the outside and then the inside of it is still natural color like this one. This is I'm guessing a factory made sheath. It's also the same guy. They'd stopped the stitching right here, and when he put the knife in, the knife stuck out the end of it. So I added in another piece and finished the stitching out about another inch. Still left a hole for if he ever falls in water while he's carrying the knife, it don't fill up and hold water, it'll drain out. And with my sheaths, I always leave that gap in it. But I mean, it's a decent looking sheath. It's got the basket weave pattern. It's dyed, but it's got that natural color on the inside, and that's just one thing that I don't like. Some people might. It's just a personal preference. So we've got that glued, and got it glued with our super glue. So I'm gonna let that sit for a couple minutes. Then we'll pop these off and we'll make sure this edge is nice and smooth all the way around. Now for this, I'm going to use my little 1x30. It's not a bad way to do it. I'm sure it's not the proper way. Like I said, it's just the way that I do it. But one thing I have learned, if you do it this way, you don't want to use a high grit belt because you will burn the leather. The one I have on here now, I think, is an 80 grit belt. And you don't want to put a whole lot of pressure, just be light with it. So we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll show you how it does. thing, it does make a mess. And you see right there, that's where it burns just a little bit, but that's not no big deal. I'll go back and clean that up. But our line's nice and smooth. All three pieces are together and flush all the way across there. So now we'll move back over to the workbench and we'll put in our stitch line. So now we've got our edge where we want it. This is our grooving tool, and this will cut out our groove for the stitch. Just lay it on there where you want to start. Follow the edge of it down. And by grooving in where your stitch goes, what you're doing is recessing your thread into the leather, which kind of protects it some from anything hitting from the outside. Might want to stay tight with it or not. Get one side done, we'll flip it over and do the other side. And this is the point where all the real leather workers probably going to tell me I'm wrong, but I do not like stitching chisels, not any that I've used or had. They put the stitch, in my opinion, too close together. So I use a very small drill bit, and I use my drill press, and I do about a 1/4 to 3/8 spacing between the holes. But I also use a very heavy thread when I sew it, and those smaller stitching chisels are just not good for a heavy thread, in my opinion.